some reassurances from the military chief of staff calling for President Bouteflika as unfit and declaring a constitutional move to move against his removal from power. The move comes despite the opposition's demands calling for complete change for the entire political regime within Algeria. And the protests on Friday, which has been estimated in the millions, come to confirm that there is still more demands from the public despite the confirmation that has been announced from the military side. On the other hand, politically it seems that many are taking several steps away from President Bouteflika. Just a few days back, the head of the RNA party, which is the coalition partner to the President Bouteflika, he has announced that his party does not support Bouteflika, calling him to step down, and several other officials and heads of domestic organizations have been submitting their resignation and calling for a change within the political system. This entire move sees that the only remaining party is the ruling party that President Bouteflika leads is still giving him support, but it is not clear what will happen next and when President Bouteflika yields to the demands of the protests. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's go to neighboring Tunisia now, where leaders from the Arab world have been gathering for a crucial meeting. Ahead of the 30th Arab Summit, Arab ministers of foreign affairs highlighted some urgent regional issues, including the situation in Syria, the occupied Palestinian authorities, Libya, and the US president's recognition of Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights.
The Arab foreign ministers held the preparatory meeting for the Tunis 30th Arab Summit. 21 proposals were discussed by Arab delegations, especially the chaos in Syria and its impact on neighboring countries.
Syrian cities and infrastructure were destroyed with millions of refugees. We must care about Syria, which is a brotherly country. A political settlement must be reached to stop the spread of terrorist groups and preserve Syria's unity, security and territorial integrity.
Arab foreign ministers announced that the financial safety net for Palestine will be activated on Sunday. They unanimously expressed support to Syria's sovereignty over the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights.
We all insist on the constant support for the just cause and the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. In addition, the U.S. recognition of Israel's rule over the Golan Heights will cause chaos and prevent peace, which will not be reached without ending occupation.
UN Special Envoy for Libya, Hassan Salameh, said the situation in the North African country is one of the main concerns for the Arab League.
All Arab foreign ministers consider ending the crisis in Libya as a priority. An important quadripartite meeting will be held on Saturday with all stakeholders to reach a new agreement on Libya.
Foreign Minister Ahmed Jinawi said Tunisia has good relations with all Arab countries and is deeply committed to joint Arab action. The minister added that there is need to capitalize on this and to reach consensus on priority issues and challenges facing the region, including the crisis in Syria, Libya and Yemen. Adnan Shabashi, CGTN, Tunis.
The United Nations Security Council has agreed to extend its peacekeeping operation in the Democratic Republic of Congo until December. This is to allow time for a withdrawal plan to be drawn up for the mission. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been asked to present a strategic review no later than October. The move to draw down follows presidential elections that ended Joseph Kabila's rule. This raised prospects for stability in the vast mineral-rich region. The 16,000-strong MONUSCO mission is the UN's biggest and most costly. It has been present in the country for 20 years. Investigators looking into the Boeing 737 MAX crash in Ethiopia have reached a preliminary conclusion that an anti-stall system was activated before the plane hit the ground. The Wall Street Journal cites people briefed on the matter, although the official report has not yet been released. It is expected as early next week, and attention has been drawn to the amount and quality of training that pilots flying the 737 MAX were taken through, following 2 fatal crashes of the plane within just 5 months. The U.S. plane maker is also being sued by the family of Jackson Mosoni, a citizen of Rwanda who died in the Ethiopian Airlines crash, at a federal court in Chicago. The lawsuit alleges that Boeing had defectively designed the automated flight control system. Meanwhile, here in Kenya, a burial service has been held in the town of Nakuru for a family that lost 5 of its members in the recent Ethiopian Airlines plane crash. John Karanja lost his wife, his daughter and 3 grandchildren in the accident. Our reporter Daniel Arupmoy brings us this report.
Distraught and sobbing relatives and friends poured into John Karanja's ancestral home in Kwaamos village, Bahati sub-county in Nakuru. They are here to witness the final send-off of the 5 family members whose lives were cut short by the tragic Ethiopian airline plane crash. The gathering at St. Michael's Church had a powerful message: to unite as a community in mourning the dead and forever remember their good deeds while on earth. Words alone cannot describe the grief and pain John Karanja has got to live with.
What God did was the right thing, because His will should be done on earth as it is in heaven.
A burial with no coffins and no bodies to bury. This is the final send-off given to 5 members of John Karanja's family who died during the plane crash. This is all that is left in memory of John Karanja's family. Hundreds of mourners here are yet to come to terms with just placing flowers instead of bodies in the coffins.
As Government of Kenya, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we are going to work with the families until we put this matter to rest.
Mr. Karanja's family's sudden death came as his wife was returning from Canada, where she had gone to help her daughter Caroline Karanja, who had just given birth and had 2 other young children to look after. March 10th will forever be remembered as a dark day that took the life of Mrs. Karanja, their daughter Caroline, and our children Ryan Njoroge, Kelly Paul and Ruby Paul, the little baby boy who was just 9 months old. The Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed minutes after takeoff southeast of Bishoftu, killing all 157 people on board. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nakuru, Kenya.
Time now for us to take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, we look at the political and economic implications of the Brexit deadlock. And local and international performers thrill fans at the 20th edition of the Cape Town Jazz Festival.
Data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
From Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. We start in the UK now with our ongoing coverage of Brexit. Getting a divorce from the European Union is proving to be an exhaustive and frustrating process for everyone involved. Friday was the official day of a supposed Brexit, but as CGTN's Richard Bestick reports, the repeated failure of UK politicians to agree to terms is now having serious consequences.
On the streets outside Parliament, angry crowds gathered as news of Brexit's latest defeat spread. A feeling of betrayal among many.
People voted to come out, and now they're trying to kick it into the long grass. And I'm here to support the people who want it out.
I predict things will get much worse if we don't get Brexit.
We feel betrayed. We ain't got a voice. We ain't got a voice anymore.
We want out. Enough's enough.
They don't represent the people. They represent themselves. They don't represent the people.
Inside, this last throw of the parliamentary dice for May's deal was, in the words of the Prime Minister, a chance to save Brexit.
Approving the withdrawal agreement today avoids a cliff edge in 2 weeks' time. It avoids European elections. It avoids a long extension, which would at least delay and could destroy Brexit.
The eyes to the right.
When defeat came, May described it as a matter of profound regret and the implications grave.
Mr. Speaker, I fear we are reaching the limits of this process in this House.
From the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, offers to the UK of a free trade customs union, but also recognition of a stark and possibly imminent alternative.
Let me be frank, ladies and gentlemen. Without a positive choice, the default option will be a no deal, which has become more likely.
With this third successive defeat for Theresa May's Brexit deal, these people may get what they wished for. The country now has just 2 weeks to come up with an alternative plan. Members of Parliament will gather again on Monday when they'll take control of the Brexit agenda and try to stitch together their own alternative compromise. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
Well, as UK lawmakers once again rejected the draft Brexit deal, European Council President Donald Tusk called a new summit to discuss the issue on the 10th of April. Tusk announced the decision via Twitter soon after the result was out in the UK. EU leaders last week gave UK Prime Minister Theresa May until Friday to secure backing for the deal she struck with them last year. If not, and London offers no other strategy, the UK will leave as early as April 12th. Now, before yesterday's vote, the EU's Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, said a no-deal Brexit has never been the bloc's plan, but, quote, the EU27 is now prepared. Well, the Brexit process is also being closely monitored here in Africa. Last year, UK Prime Minister Theresa May made her first visit to the continent to push for a number of post-Brexit deals. However, many of those deals have now been left hanging and can only be activated once the UK takes a firm decision on its separation with the European Union. Sumitra Naidu now takes a look at how South Africa is preparing for Brexit.
South Africa has put together a number of scenarios in an effort to prepare accordingly, even if there is an exit without a deal.
The British have indicated that if that happens, there is a tariff, the tariffs they will apply themselves towards the rest of the world, and those are duty-free for everything except 469 lines, and that would mean for South African wine, fruit and all kinds of vegetable-based products except for sugar, there would be no duties, so there would be no interruption in our trade for those products.
South Africa and the UK enjoy a solid trade relationship, and authorities here say they're not too concerned about Brexit as new deals will be negotiated. What is worrying, though, is ongoing investment. The UK is currently South Africa's largest source of foreign direct investment.
You're hoping that the UK doesn't suffer a lot through this Brexit issue, whichever what they decide to do. You're also hoping that if you decide to trade with another person, another country, that you're able to actually sell as much as possible. Unfortunately, some of the things that we sell have volatile prices and our earnings are hit, and that's why we have all these current account deficits.
The complications and difficulties that would arise would be in automotive products and components, where accumulation of inputs coming from the rest of the EU, from Britain, from us. All those issues would be extremely complicated and would be better solved if we could conclude our agreements.
Some experts believe a no-deal Brexit could be an advantage to countries negotiating new deals.
If the Brexit actually happens, they leave the EU, what will happen then is, the UK actually needs the world more than the world needs the UK. So you'll see there's a very interesting scenario where the UK would come to Nigeria, to Kenya, South Africa, for instance. They're some of the biggest economies in Africa to actually try and do deals there. So there's an opportunity there if you look at it as well, because then we could actually have win-win sort of trade agreements with the UK per se.
It's now wait and see. Smita Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And the business community in Nigeria is also closely watching to see the outcome of the Brexit process. Nigeria is a key trading partner of the United Kingdom and the European Union. Here's CGTN's Deji Badnus with more on that.
Nigerians are following the Brexit debate, but not with a very keen interest. Most of the people I have spoken to here don't really understand what exactly the issue is and why it has continued to drag on. For those who understand and have been following the debate keenly, they do not think Britain should leave the EU and would want to see another referendum conducted. Now, in terms of how Nigeria and indeed the entire African continent may be affected by Brexit, some financial analysts think the country and the continent may be at the receiving end if it happens.
It depends on how the Brexit exit eventually ended, whether it's going to end with a no deal or with some level of agreement between Britain and the European Union. If it goes with no deal, if it ends with a no deal, and then you're going to see a situation where the European Union will take very drastic measures that work against Britain. Then we should also see a lot of shift by institutional investors away from London, which currently is the financial capital of Europe. So if that happens, you are going to see a situation where African economies will no longer, in the short term, be able to get a kind of funding, particularly portfolio investors that come from Britain to Africa. So you might see a situation where those investors will first of all focus on the European countries instead of focusing on Africa. Currently, the structure of most fund managers in Britain, many don't have funds earmarked for Africa. Should there be a drastic shift in their location, and they are now subject to new tax regime, which is favorable towards the European Union, you might see a shift from a lot of investment coming to Africa to maybe going to European Union countries and possibly to other emerging economies.
The jury is actually still out on how much impact Brexit could have on Nigeria and the continent. The business community is following the debate very keenly, but most governments in Africa have been silent, at least publicly, not weighing in on the debate. It appears they are just adopting a wait-and-see attitude on this whole Brexit drama. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, in Senegal, a number of businessmen and analysts are concerned that African economies may be severely affected by Britain's exit from the European Union.
Like many other African countries, Senegal will not be spared from the effects of Brexit. One of the consequences of Brexit is the transfer of funds made by African citizens. This will drop dramatically. The Brexit will also decline the flow of Africans or Senegalese travelling to England. Previously, it was easy to go to London when the country was within the European Union. If the Brexit happens, only a negotiation of a cooperation agreement can guarantee the future of Senegalese and other African people based in London.
The Brexit is not a surprising issue to us because Britain has always developed an anti-migration policy compared to Italy and Spain. In fact, Brexit will affect our business, especially those based in London. In the long term, if the Brexit policy benefits Great Britain, other Europeans will follow them, and this situation can be dangerous.
Well, to shed more light on the Brexit process and its impact, we have in studio Ken Kichinga. He is the Chief Economist at Mentora Economics in Kenya. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a very eventful few weeks in the UK Parliament. What's your interpretation of the current uncertainty over a seemingly elusive Brexit deal?
It's a very stressful environment, not least for the Prime Minister, who's had her proposal shut down not once, not twice, but 3 times. So I think for her, it's a period of uncertainty because right now they voted it against yesterday. So you have almost 2 weeks for the UK to exit the EU, possibly with a no-deal agreement, which would be terrible for the business community, terrible for the political establishment. So I think something needs to give, and a lot of analysts are asking what that is.
Yeah, it's a good question, of course. And she said herself that the country is basically on a cliff edge with some grave implications of not being able to get to a deal in 2 weeks' time. But how is this Brexit process likely to influence ties between the UK and Africa?
Well, I mean, African countries will have to now invest in 2 types of relationships, one with the EU and one with the UK. And for countries such as Kenya, with its colonial ties to the UK, that should not be very difficult because we've already had that historical legacy. But for countries that possibly didn't have a very strong direct relationship with the UK, they'll have to invest, and that takes time. So those are the countries that might be affected a lot more than countries such as Kenya or Zimbabwe or Ghana that were former British colonies.
And how are those countries, the ones that weren't, say, for instance, colonies of the British, how are they going to shield themselves from any potential negative outcomes from whatever might take place within this Brexit deal?
It's quite difficult because we're in a very interconnected global economy. Some of those countries export agricultural produce to the UK. So they might have to be proactive. They might have to possibly guide their exporting agricultural community on the things that the UK market will individually need that might not have been needed by the European Union. So that proactivity, because typically most countries tend to be reactive, but if they're more proactive, they might, as you say, protect themselves. But if you look at the bigger picture, things like the currency exchange, the exchange rate risk, the sterling pound is most likely going to take a beating, and any exporter who's going to be paid in sterling pound obviously will find himself short. So those are the issues that will affect not just